Es que el CPU quedó del otro lado, entonces
¿Tiene audífonos a la mano, por si acaso?
no tengo audífonos.
A ver,
Pues,
diga un par de palabras. Voy a necesitar que los intérpretes me confirman si la escuchan o no, por
sí,
favor.
buenos días. Hola, buenos días.
Y del agua. Sin embargo, la región es particularmente vulnerable al cambio climático y a las malas prácticas a nivel productivo que han generado degradación ambiental. Entre 2008 y 2018, las pérdidas en la producción agrícola relacionadas con desastres climáticos en América Latina y el Caribe se estimaron en $29.000 millones. En 2022, los desastres relacionados con el clima afectaron a 17 países. Si no actuamos hoy en la adaptación y mitigación al cambio climático, para el 2030, más de 3 millones de personas podrían alcanzar la pobreza extrema, en un escenario donde la escasez de agua se agravará. Por eso en la región, la FAO trabaja por un mejor medio ambiente, priorizando la gestión sostenible de los recursos de la tierra, los suelos, el agua y la adaptación al cambio climático. En esa labor, también es clave el resguardo de la biodiversidad para lograr un equilibrio ecológico en los ecosistemas, garantizar la diversidad de alimentos y resguardar la cultura de las poblaciones con entornos ambientalmente sanos. A nivel urbano, las ciudades verdes y los centros de distribución de alimentos con reducción de huella ambiental, incluyendo el uso eficiente de energía y agua, también son clave. A través de esta prioridad regional, se busca proteger, restaurar y promover el uso sostenible de los ecosistemas terrestres, acuáticos y marinos y luchar contra el cambio climático. Trabajemos juntos hacia sistemas alimentarios resilientes para un futuro sostenible.
Me sacó de agua, como decimos los agricultores, porque nos dieron una semilla que sí les dio. Si no hubiera sido la semilla que me dio el ingeniero, el agrónomo Soto, para mí, 60, pues hubiéramos perdido, porque yo sembré manzana y solo pude sacar 16 poquitos, y fue una sí. Al final, con la semilla que él me dio, fue admirable y toda la gente se admiró. Y he tenido la bondad de regalar, porque debemos de compartir lo poco que se tiene, pues compartirlo con los demás, porque no esperar, porque este año que pasó fue una experiencia para los agricultores. Ya era tiempo de sembrar y no teníamos la semilla. Ahora con esa nueva semilla quizás nos va a beneficiar mejor, porque sembramos a la hora que nosotros queremos. Así es que para mí ha sido una experiencia más, y para todos los que hemos podido repartir las semillas también va a ser otra experiencia más. El tiempo de la que le llamamos el huracán Julia, yo, como le digo, descontroladamente todas las milpas las vi. Y ahí me vine a ver, vi de maíz. Y al tiempo resistente a la lluvia y todo, es bien resistente, porque como le digo, uno es por las pobrezas, no le da el bien tratamiento en el asunto del abono, pero fue bien ventajoso la semilla esa. Y he repartido a la mayoría de gente que me ha pedido, y todavía tengo unos encargos que todavía que tengo que dar, porque se trata de ir y sacar la buena semilla de ahí para seguir produciéndola y mantener una semilla que a la hora que queremos sembrar la vamos a sembrar.
Pues bien contenta con esta variedad que hemos estado probando en esta parcela. Es la primera vez que Santa Cruz por Río. Me ha gustado porque ha sido muy resistente al cambio climático, en parte a la sequía y luego a las fuertes lluvias que tuvimos, y ha sido bastante buena. La dulzura del elote ha estado muy bueno también. Y pues ahora estamos ya sacando lo que es que está muy bonito también. Vamos a seguir trabajando con él. Y la idea es seguirlo distribuyendo con los demás agricultores, productores de esta zona, ¿verdad? Ojalá que mucha gente más lo siga probando, porque sé que les va a gustar.
Pues el apoyo del centro ha sido mucho beneficioso para la comunidad, porque antes, como también pagaba, que desconocíamos de los técnicos. Ahora como que más acercamiento hay a las comunidades. Eso ayuda, como les digo, a enseñarle más al agricultor, a las técnicas. Y entonces al final se va aprendiendo y se va mejorando en el asunto de la cosecha, el trato al cultivo, plagas, todo eso ayuda. Pero para mí quizás sería beneficioso que siguieran los proyectos, porque ayuda al agricultor, de todas formas, a capacitarlo. Desconocíamos lo que es trabajar la tierra, solo, como dicen, el fósforo y la chapoda. Pero ahora con el nuevo método es diferente. Y quizás les digo que agradecido. Y si pudieran de vuelta pues regresar, quizás sería bueno. Motivar a todos los agricultores porque se trata de cuidar la tierrita, porque al final, si no la cuidamos, no nos va a dar producción. Y de ella vivimos, pues, a ser honestos.
Estamos reuniendo acá para hablar de la prevención. Siempre que hablemos de políticas públicas que generen prevenir un determinado problema es estrategia. Hacer esta clase de trabajo demuestra también el interés que tenemos nosotros los técnicos paraguayos, una institución como el SENADE, que justamente una de sus misiones es evitar que entre algunas plagas, enfermedades que nosotros no tenemos, y si llega a forma de que no genere una afectación al desarrollo del rubro o a la parte económica.
...135 países en el mundo producen hoy plátano y banano. Estamos hablando de más de la mitad del planeta. Uno compara los datos del Censo Agropecuario 2008-2022, es tal vez el cultivo con mayor crecimiento del Paraguay. Más de 40 millones de dólares exportados al año, 16.000 hectáreas, está creciendo y por eso para nosotros es muy importante trabajar en este ejercicio.
Nos encontramos en Tembiaporá, en Paraguay, celebrando el simulacro regional para los países de la COSABE como parte de la estrategia que se viene desarrollando en América Latina para prepararse, así como la contención de la marsites por fusarium en la raza 4 tropical. Estamos aquí con la CENAVE, productores y además organismos internacionales.
Es muy importante esta simulación que está haciendo el SENADE, el FAO acá en esta zona, porque de hoy en adelante tenemos que estar preparados para cualquier aparición de enfermedades.
En este ejercicio, los expertos están haciendo énfasis en sintomatología típica, procesos de vigilancia, utilizando las herramientas que proporciona la inteligencia artificial, y también están haciendo mucho énfasis en lo que se debe hacer para erradicar un foco utilizando las medidas de bioseguridad que son esenciales.
Una vida mejor para las personas, sin dejar a nadie atrás. Durante la celebrada en cuatro los alimentos y tienen proporcionada y aliciona mucho riesgo que los sistemas agroalimentarios sean vulnerables a diferentes crisis. Y el Caribe, el 25% de la población se identifica como indígena o afrodescendiente, mientras que las mujeres constituyen el 36% de los trabajadores del sistema agroalimentario en el mundo. Por eso en la región, la FAO trabaja por una mejor vida, priorizando una transformación rural inclusiva a través de acciones dirigidas a acelerar la inversión y la cooperación internacional. Erradicar la pobreza rural y reducir las desigualdades es fundamental para impulsar un desarrollo económico que ofrezca oportunidades para todos. Trabajemos juntos para reducir las desigualdades para un futuro más sostenible y resiliente.
En un mundo donde la seguridad FAO, en conjunto con el Organismo Internacional Regional de Sanidad Agropecuaria, o IRSA, y expertos mundiales, se realizan simulacros regionales sobre respuesta a la langosta voladora.
Estamos en la parte de Quinchín, una de las zonas donde realmente pasan las mangas de langosta, las que se dirigen hacia Campeche. Lo que hacemos acá es pasar a dar información a los municipios para que con ayuda de ellos y con ayuda de nosotros podamos localizar fácilmente lo que son las mangas de langostas.
Así como talleres de análisis del riesgo con mapas epidemiológicos como el principal espacio de intercambio de información y conocimiento para esta región. Este simulacro nos permite evaluar y mejorar cada para una emergencia fitosanitaria.
Mi nombre es Verónica Chávez, trabajo para el Servicio de Protección Agropecuaria en Guatemala por parte de OIRSA y en conjunto con el Ministerio de Agricultura, Ganadería y Alimentación. Actualmente estamos haciendo un simulacro frente a situaciones de emergencia y estamos identificando qué hacer frente a presencia de plaga de langosta centroamericana. Para mí, esta invitación ha sido muy importante y significativa, ya que como una persona joven y también como mujer, me ayuda a romper ciertas brechas que en mi país pues actualmente lamentablemente existe, y con todo el conocimiento que yo puedo adquirir en este tipo de actividades también puedo enfrentar ciertas carencias que podemos tener desde el punto de vista de crear nuevos proyectos en conjunto con compañeros que ya tengan mucha más experiencia para poder incluir a más gente joven y mujeres en este tipo de situaciones.
Avanzamos hacia sistemas agroalimentarios más resilientes y sostenibles, alineados con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible.
Para nosotros ha sido de gran importancia la presencia de diferentes organismos nacionales de protección fitosanitaria de la región de Mesoamérica. Este simulacro nos ha permitido articular todas las estrategias para el manejo en la langosta centroamericana. Y de esta manera poder continuar acciones enfocadas fundamentalmente bajo la prevención del riesgo fitosanitario en nuestra que hemos venido trabajando también esta semana diferentes escenarios en las distintas estrategias, teniendo en cuenta los temas relacionados con el cambio climático, hacia de manera que finalmente estamos articulando las 4 mejoras bajo el marco estratégico para esta agenda de salud.
Cinco claves para combatir la resistencia a los antimicrobianos, también conocida como RAM. Políticas para el combate de RAM. Esto significa promover el abordaje integrado de la salud de las personas, animales y del medio ambiente. Aumentar el financiamiento. Es fundamental asignar más recursos para acciones efectivas en la lucha contra la resistencia antimicrobiana. Mejorar los sistemas de vigilancia y compartir datos. Invertir en monitoreo eficaz es vital para entender y así combatir la resistencia antimicrobiana. Usar la normativa y la legislación. Establecer leyes más estrictas sobre el uso y eliminación de antimicrobianos. Apoyar el trabajo multisectorial. La colaboración entre ministerios, sociedad civil y el sector privado es esencial para generar conciencia y cambiar antibióticos bajo la supervisión profesional médica o veterinaria. Es hora de actuar. Comparte este video, infórmate y únete al combate contra la resistencia a los antimicrobianos. Juntos podemos hacer la diferencia.
Necesitamos una mejor nutrición para las personas, para el planeta. Durante la última conferencia regional de la FAO, celebrada en Georgetown, Guyana, están unánimemente 4 prioridades regionales interconectadas que reflejan las 4 mejoras de la FAO. Dimensiones que contribuyen a la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios y que guiarán a la organización en América Latina y el Caribe hasta 2026. La región enfrenta desafíos el hambre y la malnutrición. Aunque el número de personas que sufren hambre disminuyó ligeramente en 2023, 41 millones de personas en la región aún la sufren. América Latina y el costo saludable en comparación con los promedios mundiales. El estado de $4,56 por persona por día significa que 1 de cada 4 personas no puede permitirse una dieta saludable. Por eso en la región, la FAO trabaja por una mejor nutrición, priorizando poner fin al hambre y lograr la seguridad alimentaria y la nutrición sin dejar a nadie. Una prioridad en la región. Trabajemos juntos. Un futuro más brillante.
América tiene el 28% de organismos complejos como la degradación del medio ambiente, la pérdida de biodiversidad y los efectos de la crisis climática. La demanda mundial de carne, productos lácteos y huevos aumentará 20% al 2050, lo que hará temas. La hay 770 millones de personas que sobreviven con menos de $1,90 por día. Aproximadamente la mitad depende directamente de la para la creciente demanda de origen. Se requiere prácticas innovadoras y tecnología rural. La ganadería debe avanzar hacia un modelo sostenible, implementando prácticas que favorecen la biodiversidad, favoreciendo a la par la protección y restauración de los ecosistemas. Es hora de actuar. La actividad ganadera puede contribuir con soluciones integrales a enfrentar el cambio climático, la inseguridad alimentaria o la degradación.
In Em 2012, a Assembleia General das Nações Unidas proclamou o Ano Internacional das Cooperativas como forma de reconhecer seu papel essencial na economia global e no desenvolvimento sustentável. Em gesto significativo, además, se ha declarado 2025 como o Ano Internacional das Cooperativas. A FAO ha identificado as cooperativas como aliados clave nessa luta, destacando a importância da agricultura familiar na cadeia agroalimentar. A Oficina Regional da FAO trabalha arduamente na renda cooperativa para transformar os sistemas agroalimentários. Com mais de 3 milhões de cooperativas no mundo e 28 mil em América Latina e o Caribe, o impacto desse modelo é indiscutível. Essas cooperativas reúnem a 6 milhões de cooperados, potenciando o empreendimento, o empoderamento econômico e promovendo o desenvolvimento sustentável e inclusivo. A importância das cooperativas radica em sua capacidade para estimular a governança e o desenvolvimento territorial, sendo motores para a transformação dos sistemas agroalimentários. A FAO ha colaborado com diversas organizações especialistas para apresentar a Lei Modelo para Cooperativas Agroalimentárias ante o Parlamento Latino. Asimismo, com a Aliança Cooperativa Internacional, LACI, celebramos mais de 15 anos de trabalho conjunto no setor. O futuro da segurança alimentar e o desenvolvimento sustentável em nossa região depende em grande medida do fortalecimento e apoio às cooperativas como parte de uma série de instâncias em las que devemos continuar trabalhando por um futuro melhor para todas e para todos.
Necesitamos una mejor producción para las personas, para el planeta. Durante la última conferencia regional de la FAO celebrada en Georgetown, Guyana, los 33 Estados miembros aprobaron unánimemente 4 prioridades regionales interconectadas que reflejan las 4 mejoras de la FAO, 4 dimensiones que contribuyen a la transformación de los sistemas agroalimentarios y que guiarán a la organización en América Latina y el Caribe hasta 2026. Nuestra región aporta el 14% de la producción mundial de alimentos. Sin embargo, el 33% de las tierras cultivables están moderada y altamente degradadas, y la pérdida de más del 40% de la producción se relaciona con plagas y enfermedades. La FAO trabaja por una mejor producción en la región, priorizando una producción eficiente, inclusiva y sostenible, donde se necesita abordar integralmente las dimensiones ambiental, económica y social de la producción agropecuaria, forestal, de la pesca y de la acuicultura. Trabajemos juntos hacia una producción sostenible, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
El proyecto Cooperación Sur-Sur, Transformación Digital e Innovación en la Agricultura concluye su implementación con resultados clave que han impulsado la mejora de los medios de vida rurales en América Latina y el Caribe.
El proyecto involucró a 12 países de la región: Argentina, Barbados, Chile, Costa Rica, Cuba, Guyana, Jamaica, México, Panamá, Surinam, Trinidad y Tobago y Uruguay.
Durante su implementación, hubo un total de 800 personas de áreas rurales que participaron directamente del proyecto, mientras que más de 4.000 se beneficiaron de manera indirecta.
Además, se realizaron más de 70 capacitaciones en alfabetización digital, se entregaron más de 400 equipos tecnológicos como tablets, drones y computadores, y se promovió el trabajo colaborativo con más de 50 entidades. Este proyecto, liderado por la Organización de las Naciones Unidas para la Alimentación y la Agricultura, la República Popular China y la Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos y Caribeños, ha reflejado el compromiso y la importancia de promover la cooperación entre los países del sur global.
También ha demostrado que a través de una transformación digital inclusiva en los sectores rurales es posible alcanzar mejores sistemas agroalimentarios que permitan una mejor producción, una mejor nutrición, un mejor medio ambiente y una vida mejor, sin dejar a nadie atrás.
los sistemas agroalimentarios que permiten llevar alimentos nutritivos como frutas y hortalizas hasta nuestra mesa están siendo afectados por una serie de factores como la variabilidad del clima y los fenómenos climáticos extremos que pueden aumentar el costo de los alimentos nutritivos y hacer más inasequibles las dietas saludables, contribuyendo a la inseguridad alimentaria y la malnutrición. Estos eventos son cada vez más frecuentes y de mayor intensidad y alteran el régimen habitual de precipitaciones y temperaturas. El Panorama Regional de la Seguridad Alimentaria y la Nutrición 2024, publicado por 5 agencias de Naciones Unidas, plantea este como uno de los principales desafíos para lograr la erradicación.
Now to the stage, Madam Valesca Naranjo, the Secretary of Elige Vivir Sano, who's joining us in person. Please, Madam Secretary, if you can sit on the second seat, and then I wanted to invite our Director of the Division of Food and Nutrition of FAO, Lynette Neffert, please. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this regional dialogue on the new SDG on the minimum diversity of diets. I am Daniela Godol, main officer of food security policies and nutrition policies of FAO for Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'll be participating in the moderation of the first part of this event today. We would like to thank for the presence of those who are joining us in person and online on this dialogue on the SDG regarding the minimum diversity of diet, a milestone in the follow-up of the goals of the SDGs. FAO, together with UNICEF, have taken on the joint custody of this new indicator, setting the closure of a long process begun more than a year ago by coalition of countries and international organizations. This SDG addresses a crucial aspect that was not foreseen in the follow-up in the progress towards the eradication of malnutrition and the consequence of SDG 2, as well as the 2030 agenda as a whole. Understanding that food diversity is essential for achieving access and also the eating of healthy diets for the whole population, leaving nobody behind. We'd like to remind you that this conversation is being broadcasted with simultaneous interpreting for those who are online and also for those who are in person. In order to begin this activity, we would like to pay attention to the welcome address of our regional representative at interim and economist head of FAO, Mr. Máximo Torero. Please go ahead.
Distinguidos y distinguidas participantes. Mi nombre es Máximo Torero, soy el economista jefe de la FAO, director adjunto al interim de la región de Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Es un honor para mí dirigirme a ustedes en este diálogo regional hacia un nuevo indicador del ODS2, diversidad mínima de la dieta. Este espacio tiene como objetivo profundizar el conocimiento del indicador y su relevancia para avanzar hacia dietas saludables que contribuyan a erradicar el hambre y la malnutrición en todas sus formas. ¿Por qué este indicador es tan importante?
Why is this SDG so important? The current scenario of the region sets important challenges. Even when the figures of hunger and food insecurity have been reduced for the second year in a row, 6.2% of Latin American and the Caribbean population still are in hunger, and 28.2% still are suffering moderate or severe food insecurity, that is malnutrition or overnutrition. Obesity affects about 30% of adults, while overweight in minors of 5 years old reaches 8.6%, and it's above the world average of 5.6%. At the same time, we estimate that 48% of children between 6 to 59 months of age and 63% of women in reproductive age suffer from deficiency of one or more macronutrients. As we know, malnutrition has severe effects at all stages of life. It hinders and damages health, well-being, the cognitive development, and also the capacity of work with commercial and also I'm sorry, the audio is very poor. We know that this has an economic and social cost that is very large. However, we can do good nutrition for everyone, just achieving access and eating of healthy diets. A healthy diet is adequate in nutrients, is balanced in energy, consumption is moderate in harmful substances for health. And also, it's importantly as well for today's workshops, healthy diets are diverse. It is a great challenge, especially for the region. A healthy diet is out of economic access for 27.7% of the population of Latin America and the Caribbean population. It's even the region with the highest cost for a healthy diet. But we know that even those who have no economic access still don't eat a healthy diet for a number of reasons, including availability, among other factors. That is, despite the fact that even people can have access, they decide and they do not eat a healthy diet. Therefore, it is not only about lowering the cost of healthy diets without improving access, it's also changing the behavior. Clearly, this has to change. And if the transition to healthy diets without this transition to healthy diets, we're never going to achieve SDG 2. This transition can contribute to a lot of other SDGs related to health, environment, etc. Despite this important, to date, we had no indicator as part of SDGs to monitor the quality of diet. There's many countries still that still don't have information regarding the dietitian consumption of the population. Without this information, you can identify the most important challenges that need to be addressed. No, the populations are at greater risk. No, you can monitor the change and the improvements in the access to healthy diets. This is beginning to change. Last month, the Commission of Statistics of the UN approved the inclusion of a minimum diversity in diet as a new SDG 2 indicator. FAO has had the pleasure of supporting the process together with UNICEF. This indicator represents a key progress in the measurement of the quality of diets, particularly for the vulnerable groups such as women and children. UNICEF is going to be responsible for the SDG for children, for boys and girls of 24 months, while FAO is going to be for women at a fertile age 15 to 49 years of age. This meeting, colleagues, will allow us to know these new indicators and exchange knowledge about the application and the follow-up in the policies of food security in the region, as well as reflect on the challenges and opportunities that implementation means. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope that at the end of the seminar, we can come to a clear understanding of the following steps to start monitoring the access to healthy diets and this indicator that has been approved for the diversity of food and diets. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best for today.
Agradecemos este saludo de
We would
nuestro
like to thank the greetings for the regional representative who wanted to join us, even though he could not be here in person. We'd like to invite now to take the floor to those who are joining us on the stage and also online. Firstly, I would like to invite Violet Warnery, representative of UNICEF in Chile, who is joining us online.
Gracias y gracias,
Thank you very much.
estimados
And thank you, the representatives of FAO and other counterparts of the governments.
Lo siento que estoy en línea.
I am very sorry I am online. I am in Santiago, but I have other matters, so I am in between other meetings. So it is very important for me to be present, even though it is online. It is very important for me to be with you so I can present the new SDG, the new official SDG for the, which is SDG 2, that wants to do the follow-up of diets, for healthy diets, which is fundamental for finishing hunger and malnutrition and all the forms, and also a pre-requirement to reach other SDGs. The adoption of SDG, of the minimum diversity of diets, as a new SDG took place during the 56th period session of the Commission for Statistics of the UN. This is a monumental milestone for all of us because it places foods and diets of children, boys and girls, small children, and women at the center of our efforts to prevent all forms of malnutrition. We need to celebrate this achievement. So this success is the result of a joint effort that, among other agencies of the UN and the leadership of FAO and UNICEF, with the support of SDG and also the member states such as Switzerland, Malawi, Brazil, and Bangladesh, with the backup of Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands. The new SDG for the minimum diversity of diets is targeting two vulnerable groups from the nutritional point of view: boys and girls from 6 to 23 months and women from 15 to 49 years of age. This indicator gives us a valuable sign regarding these groups. A bit more of information regarding the diversity of diets is especially important in the first years of life when the insufficient intake of nutrients, special nutrients, can cause greater harm to the survival, and also it can affect child mortality, child growth and cognitive growth, trapping boys and girls in a cycle of poverty and also a cycle of deprivation. This goal is regarding, this can be tackled by providing nutritious foods that are varied for mothers and also for the carers of boys and girls between 6 and 23 months. We need to consider that a child will be consuming at the very least 4 of the 8 foods that will comply with the minimum diversity of diet. UNICEF, as custodian of this data, would like to coordinate with the other organizations, and this is an effort to guarantee that the data is available and that it is internationally comparable. We are also custodying 20 other indicators, and we have experiences such as creating capacities or statistic capacities to provide technical support and establishing mechanisms for the gathering and verification in the country, and also maintain world databases. UNICEF maintains currently the databases that are manual at all times, and this includes at a country level and also at a global level. For instance, in the LAC, this goal that we have now, more than 1 in 3 boys and girls comply with a minimum diversity of diet. The problem is data and the responsibility of data. This is a key priority for us for the future, to increase the possibility of having data, and we hope that this dialogue will help in this topic as well, so we can have this data. And with this small address, I wish you that you continue your meeting with great success. Thank you for your collaboration.
Muchas gracias. Agradecemos a Violet Warnery.
Thank you very much to Violet Warnery, representative of UNICEF in Chile, who joined us online.
Quisiéramos invitar
we'd like to invite to address us Madam Valesca Naranjo, Executive Secretary of Elige Vivir Sano, who is here in person. Please go ahead.
¿Esto? Ahí, sí. Bueno, buenos días a todas y a todos.
Good morning, everyone.
Esta es mi cuarta jornada en este espacio.
This is my 4th time in this space this week, so I can't fail to point out that as a program and as a summoning country, we were sharing what the preparation meeting was for the roadmap for the transformation of sustainable food systems. And I would like to comment to you as well that for us, the chance of being a space that is not only summoning you, but also that had to do this accountability, this update, speaking of the roadmap, we had a couple of things that were very clear, speaking of that agenda, that I would like to convey to you. First, when we were asked, what has happened in the update? A first great novelty that is associated to this SDG and this opportunity that is summoning us today is that the government of Gabriel Boric, president, has set as a priority for the Ministry of Social Development the national policy of care. And this creates a framework or an umbrella of work that is very different to what we were doing before. In turn, it highlights those who need to be cared for and those who are the carers. This places in a position where women are playing a role that is not only important, but also, as we know, and when we speak about diet and nutrition and zero hunger, and when we speak about all of those variables, we know that within the vulnerable groups that are vulnerable, but at the same time is half of the population, that group is women. And there we don't have figures that make us happy. So we really celebrate the arrival of this SDG. Speaking of the fact that on top of that, we realize of the paradox of diets nowadays, where Chile is not exempt to this. We have a very important norm and standard in terms of food policies, especially with the boys, girls, and adolescents. This tradition that comes with a half a liter of milk, or the labeling and the policy of seals that has also been exported to many other countries. And they have replicated because of how helpful it was to create better nutrition. But however, Chile has very complex numbers. And when we talk about malnutrition by excess, we know that 75% of the population in general has malnutrition by excess in Chile, which is way below, way above the region and well above the world average. When we talk about boys, girls, and youth, we also have extremely high figures. We're talking about 50% in boys, girls, and youth. And in women, we are speaking of more than 3 points, between 78 and 80%, depending on the regions, is malnutrition by excess in women. So we have this huge challenge as a country regarding the figures, regarding this excellent standard that is pushing us and forcing us to have and improve how are we measuring this and what are the measurements that we require to improve these numbers so we can progress in better nutrition and of course with a gender perspective and of course with a perspective of life cycle, because this SDG will be very important for us to progress in that. So we celebrate the work, this proposal. We're very eager to know the methodology so we can contribute and become a part of that. So thank you so much for summoning us. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Gracias a todos y a todas por sus palabras de bienvenida.
Thanks everyone for your words in this meeting. Now we will proceed with the next presentation. We ask you, please, those who are following us online, can include all of your questions in the comment section or in the chat, while those in the room can write down your questions so we can ask them later on. So we're going to be beginning with Lina Neffel, our Director of the Division of Food and Nutrition of FAO, who is joining us in the regional of FAO. Dr. Neffel started her work in Institute of Nutritional Epidemiology in Mexico, where he directed some impact assessment studies to improve the potential of the impact of social protection programs in Mexico and in our region. Then she led technical support teams and assessment of programs in NGO teams. So more recently, she worked in the Global Alliance for the Improvement of Nutrition before joining to FAO as the Director of the Division of Food and Nutrition at the beginning of 2022. Dr. Neufeld is the president of the International Association of Scientists in Nutrition, IUNS, and has taken other positions of leadership in global instances and technical advisory of the WHO, among others. She has an MA and a PhD in international nutrition from Cornell University. She is joining us today to take this first step in the path towards implementation in this change in the region, showing that the indicator for minimum diversity for women's diets is one of the main progresses for sustainable development.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Daniela y la oficina regional por organizar este espacio.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and thank you to the regional office for hosting this event, and thank you for attending. If you please can put my presentation up, I'd like to address the context and the issue of unhealthy diets that has been introduced already by Dr. Torero. After that, I'd like to take a moment to talk about what a healthy diet is, because this is a very important context to fully understand when and how this indicator is coming along, and also what are the diet indicators, how we are measuring in order to fully look at the indicator in that context. Now, I'd like to start while we wait for the presentation. We know that we have a huge challenge ahead of us to face malnutrition. We are not moving forward at the pace that we should be moving forward.
Lo voy a ir rápido. Sabemos que
I'm going to very quickly breeze through this. We know that we are not fulfilling the goals that we had agreed upon regarding the different ways of malnutrition, the different forms of malnutrition. We have heard that already. We also know that even though all the forms of malnutrition are complex, they are multi-factor. Unhealthy diets are the common factor among those issues. We also know that there is a huge prevalence of deficiency of vitamins and minerals that is underestimated because we are not measuring, and that affects the development of the brain. It affects the neurological functioning and all the biological functions that we are not measuring either. So I'm going to skip this. We know the numbers. We know that the economic aspect is a hurdle that prevents us from consuming a healthy diet, but it isn't the only one. There are barriers related to physical access apart from economic access to foods, and we have to face these challenges all together. But before we move on to that, there is a huge problem, which is that in the media, whenever you open the newspapers, there is always a new superfood or super diet that will save everyone. It happens on the daily, and it is extremely problematic. There are mixed, contradictory signals, and it does not help us move forward in this issue. It does not help us with the political agenda. It does not help us with the populations. So, to address this issue, last year, alongside with the WHO, we launched a statement together regarding the principles of a healthy diet. Those principles are based on decades of scientific evidence, and they are based on biology, the human physiology. It does not talk about the importance of diet for the environment or anything else. It just focuses on what is healthy for a human being in terms of their biological functions. And as it was mentioned by Dr. Torero, it is fairly simple, complex, but at the same time rather simple. A healthy diet needs to be suitable in terms of all the key nutrients. It needs to be balanced in terms of energy consumption and sources of energy. It needs to be diverse with a high variety of foods, and it also needs to be moderated in the intake of foods and components like salts, sugars, trans fats that we know are connected and linked with effects that are nocive to the health. Of course, to achieve this, food needs to be safe. Now, the principles, as I mentioned earlier, are based on evidence and human biology, and therefore they are universally applicable. I will not dive into the detail, but very quickly, the fact that it is adequate, it is based on physiological requirements for each one of the biological processes that we need to carry out. Our organs require different nutrients to fulfill different processes. That is why it needs to be adequate for that. Diversity helps us provide nutrients, but also there are a number of factors called bioactives that are not necessarily nutrients, but help us sustain a process of digestion which is healthy, as well as other processes that are called bioactive factors. Balance favors the health of the heart, as well as other health outcomes. And of course, moderation helps us promote balance, because many of these foods that we have to moderate are high in calorie contribution but low in nutrients. So it would be favorable for us to achieve balance and moderation in terms of our energy balance. And also products in themselves, beyond the energy content, several of them have been proven to be connected to different health conditions. Now, how is this translated in the context of a healthy diet? In the context, there isn't a single healthy diet, and this is a key message that needs to be disseminated. The principles are universal. However, what is in your plate is highly dependent on the context. It depends on your preferences, your culture, your religion, your access to foods, the climate where you live, and many other factors. But there can be many different combinations that are healthy as long as they fulfill the four principles stated above. In one country, that needs to be translated into the food systems-based dietary guidelines. And precisely this year is, or this is where environmental aspects are included. This is where production aspects are included. They are embedded in the food systems-based dietary guidelines so that the idea of a healthy diet, as well as any other message put forward by the country, because they will be different each country, will consider those issues regarding a healthy diet, as well as other priorities as established by each of the countries. This year, as FAO, we are going to publish a new guideline that would help us consider factors related to sustainability and in the development of the guidelines. And by the end of the year, this is going to be available. Now, moving on to the aspect of data. Why do we want data? We need to estimate the size of the problem in each country. We need to follow up on that situation in different areas of the country, and also in time. We need to have timely alarms whenever there are issues or emergencies happening. We need to have actions put in place, studying the causes of the issue, to inform the design of actions and to assess the impact of said actions. That, as nutritionists, that would be our toolbox. And if we had that implemented in all the countries, we would have better programs to improve our diets. But it is very important to mention that there isn't a single piece of data or indicator that would serve all these objectives the same way, because they have different features, they have different objectives, there are different goals to each of the pieces of information that we need. Very quickly, I'd like to share with you the case of Mexico, because in Mexico they have made quite the investment along decades to collect quantitative data that is representative of the diet consumption of different population groups. And if you look at the left-hand picture, you see that that was the data that impacted the decision of implementing taxes over sugary beverages. Because if you look at this, these are girls 10 to 13, and the pictures or the sizes of the square represent the calories that they would obtain in their diets from each of those groups. And it is possible to see that there is a huge contribution from sweets, sweet beverages, and also other savory snacks. And that was the decision that was made, and it talks about the issue of balance at the end of the day, and this was the data that ultimately triggered the decision to do something. Also with the data, they were able to measure the prevalence of the adequacy of intake of certain micronutrients. As you can see here, 15% of the girls in that critical age gap are intaking enough calcium to fulfill their requirements. And it is terrible, or it was terrible, specifically or especially for that time frame when the bones are forming. And there are countries that have enough data. Sometimes I hear people saying that countries are not collecting data, but they are. Countries can and they actually do make that investment. However, it is expensive, it is slow, but it is key to have that information. And I'd like to reiterate this because having data with monitoring for the SDG is part of the objective too, and we will move on to that in a moment. So data, once again, this is to show you in the case of teenagers, there is a huge scarcity of data, even though this region has a better collection of data, better availability of data than the rest of the world. Now, we have talked about monitoring for the SDG. Now, what are the features of a good indicator for that monitoring purpose? As I mentioned, in the example of Mexico, it needs to be suitable for the decision making and for the implementation of different actions. We need to estimate the issue, we need to assess the impact of the actions that are put in place, but this is something different. This is something that needs to reflect one aspect of this problem specifically. It needs to have validity to do that, and it also needs to be quick and easy in terms of the collection and management of the information, because reporting on the SDGs happens on a yearly basis. How many? Well, there are experts here. There are 100 and something indicators. There are plenty of indicators. And because of that, we cannot have such a complex data that would prevent us from following up on the progress of the SDG. It needs to be simple, it needs to be quick, it needs to be replicable with a relatively reasonable frequency. There needs to be comparability between the different contexts and time periods, meaning that if we talk about a certain percentage of diet diversity here in Chile, the concept needs to be the same for Australia, for Ghana, for Canada, and all the other countries that are participating. That is key. And also you need to have data. You cannot propose a new SDG indicator, a new additional indicator, saying in the future there will be data. No, that was the criteria that we have to fulfill to make sure that the indicator was approved, and it was approved, meaning that we did fulfill the requirements. Now, what is the indicator? The indicator is one indicator for what is called is a yes or no indicator, but under that yes and no, there is so much more information. So to the answer yes or no, the questions are: the women and children are fulfilling that minimum diversity in their diets, yes or no? And the magic number for this is 5. Do they consume 5 of the groups or more? Would that be yes or no? If they consume from 0 to 4, then the answer would be no. Why are we interested in this? This number 5 was validated against the risk of not consuming enough vitamins and minerals in your diet. We are going to talk about that a little bit more, but this number has been validated in multiple different contexts so that we made sure that it indicates a better diet. I will not read the different points in the list. However, we need to know that the questions or the groups were different for children and women. As it was mentioned already, the indicator for children is going to be under the responsibility of UNICEF, and the indicator for women is going to be under the responsibility of my team with the FAO and the statistics division. Here I have added 2 groups at the end. It is very important to consider this because when we conduct measurements to report on the SDG, we are going to have this dichotomy. We are going to report a percentage that fulfills with the 5 groups or not. However, as a country, there is so much more information available, and they can use it for some of the other goals that I mentioned earlier. And adding 2 more groups that are not necessary, it is not mandatory to include them, of course, for the estimation. However, it does expand the usefulness of the information for other goals beyond just reporting on the SDG, and those groups would be sugary beverages and junk food, because in the current context they are key and we should not forget their importance. Now, we have talked about the strengths of this because it is a validated instrument. It has been validated considering 1 or 2 aspects of the diet. It has been validated in different contexts. The instruments are ready for over 100 countries. They will just take the instruments and apply them, or they need slight adaptations to make sure that they reflect the reality of the country. It's not like the food safety survey because it is one instrument that is universally used the same way. This is not the case here for the very same reason that I mentioned earlier. The diets are different. The foods that are eaten within vegetables and fruits are different, for instance. So, of course, the tool needs to be adjusted to the context. And we also have existing data in the case of women for approximately 100 countries. Now, back to the 4 components of the healthy diet, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of adequacy and the intake of at least 5 groups the consumption of under 5 groups indicates risk of not having enough vitamins and minerals in your diet. So it would be a proxy for the adequacy of the diet. And of course, in terms of diversity, because of the aspect of the difference between foods, the more groups, the better. Of course, once again, we can look beyond the yes and no. We can look beyond whether they're eating fruits, vegetable, eggs, or other animal foods, and that can also be used in the country as input to identify different issues. Now, it does not give us all the information that I mentioned earlier, but yet it is a very important tool. For instance, if in Chile you see that in the south of the country they're not eating fruits and vegetables, you can conduct a study specific for that region that will lower the cost of study in depth in order to figure out what is happening. So it gives you insights, it gives you further information that you can use for so many other objectives beyond just reporting on the SDG. That is the world situation at the moment from the data available. Of course, it needs to be included in the report for Latin America and the Caribbean, there are 14 countries that have information, and in the region, they are doing a little bit better than the world, and at the same time, similar to North America and Europe in terms of the ratio of women that are eating from 5 different groups or more, which is very important. That means that there is a 22% that is not eating from 5 different groups or more, and we need to know why. However, they are doing better than other regions. In Africa, for instance, under 50% of women are eating. I do not have the information regarding children, but this is just an FYI. As I mentioned earlier, that indicator does not contain all the information that we would like to have. And just to reiterate that, it does not identify the nutrients. It only says that there is greater risk of inadequate consumption of nutrients. It does not speak of the specific nutrient, calcium, iron, zinc. It does not measure the severity of the issue either. Is it severe? Is it moderate deficiency? No, that would require further information. And also diversity. It does not give us information regarding the diversity or variety within the food group. And I would be interested in knowing not only that they are eating vegetables, but what vegetables and what variety. Once again, that would be a different piece of information that needs to be collected. Regarding balance, there is an information because it does not quantify the energy intake, and we cannot just make up information. We do not know what is the intake of energy, whether it is above the threshold or not. And in terms of moderation, if we add the two groups, it is not within the indicator. Formally speaking, it is not part of the reporting for the SDG. But once again, if we were to add these two additional groups, that could give us some information, but once again, it does not estimate the amount. It only says yes or no, and not how much.
It is important to know the limitation of the data that we have and have several guidelines and tools for the development of capacities and for the collection and use of the diet diversity both for women and children. FAO has a course in the e-learning academy. We have a manual, but these indicators already have a very broad trajectory in several institutions. The Feed the Future of the USAID use this as an impact assessment for some interventions. The EFAD uses this as an indicator for the portfolio of investments. So if you look at the literature, you'll see a number of documents, plenty of them. So these are the official guidelines, and we will be working together, as I mentioned, with the Office of Statistics and UNICEF, so we can support the development of capacities, guidelines, etc. Because here we have a very important responsibility with countries to ensure that they use the most up-to-date methodology, and that is also standardized, because sometimes it is adapted to the objective of an organization. So here we need to make sure that the standard methodology is being used, that we are producing here. And finally, I wanted to just mention, this has not had to do much with indicator, but it is very important that we continue progressing in indicators that are equally easy to measure, that represent the other foods and other aspects of healthy diets that we're interested in, such as moderation, so forth. And a couple of years ago, already we confirmed, together with UNICEF and the WHO, to go together forwards with this science and develop guidelines so countries can see beyond the reporting of the SDG what it is that we as UN are recommending for other methodologies and other SDGs of other aspects of diets. And with that, I finished. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Lynette.
Thank you very much, Lynette, for your intervention. It truly lets us know more about the SDG what can we use this for, and also for those things that we can't use it for, and then we need to complement this with other instruments. So now I would like to welcome the statistician of FAO, Mr. Dolian Calambresus Navarro, currently working in the statistics division of FAO. And he joined the organization since 2013 and has been supporting FAO as a custodian body of 21 SDGs. He currently represents institutions in the interinstitutional meeting group for the SDGs and has also provided training and technical assistance in numerous countries in the region. Today, is joining us online, and he's gonna make a presentation on the perspective of the Division of Statistics of FAO. Thank you very much. I am very thankful for the chance of participating in this very important meeting. Please allow me to share my screen. My presentation today is going to be about the statistic activities for the consolidation of the reporting of this new SDG as a part of the SDGs. And we already heard all of these previous speakers referring to this important milestone, which is the adoption of this SDG as an SDG. So this is a result of a long process that started more than a year ago in the context of the comprehensive revision of the framework of indicators of SDGs 2025. So this was carried out by the institutional groups of experts on the SDGs. In the framework of this comprehensive revision, FAO and UNICEF supported the proposal of including this additional indicator in the framework of the SDGs. So this proposal was accepted by the interinstitutional group in the session in October 2024, and then it was approved by the Statistics Commission in March 2025. That is weeks ago. Therefore, FAO stops being the custody agent of 21 SDGs and now is the custodian of 22 indicators. What does this mean to be a custodian agency for the SDG indicators? Let's remember that for each SDG, we have identified international body with several responsibilities. First, leading the methodological development and keep the documentation up to date. Second, supporting the statistic capacity of countries to generate and spreading national data. Also, gathering data from national sources, guaranteeing their comparability and coherence, and also sharing them at a world level. And lastly, contributing to the follow-up of the world-level progress and also regional and national progress. For instance, through the making of narratives and reports that are of an analytic nature. We already mentioned before that one of the criteria for the adoption of a new SDG was the availability of data. And here we can see that, in fact, we do have data for the minimum diversity of diets for women for 94 countries. And this represents 47% of the member countries of the UN. We also have data of minimum food diversity for children for more than 51.8% of the countries. That covers 77.8% of the population. The data for the minimum diversity of diets for children come from surveys of multiple indicators, what we call the mix or the DHS. So, as the current data for the minimum diversity of diets for women come as a whole from the Gallup World Survey, well, we do have data coming from the Demographical and Health Survey. Despite the sufficiency worldwide of data regarding the minimum diet diversity for women, the region of Latin America and the Caribbean has an availability that is a little bit more mixed. We have numerous countries that do not have the necessary data for this new SDG. So far, we have data for the 2/3 of the Latin American countries, but only 15.4% of countries in the Caribbean. As a whole, we have 14 countries that have representative data in the whole Latin American and Caribbean region. Even more, the available data in the region come mainly from the National Gallup Survey, that is, few or almost no countries have produced an SDG by their own volition. So this means this needs to start changing. This needs to be, since this is now an SDG, countries now need to make an effort to produce this indicator and include this information in the national service. And for these, countries can have a methodology that is broadly validated for both components. Already we heard before that there are several guidelines for accompanying this effort. Also, we saw that both components of the SDG are based on a relatively simple module that asks the surveyed people if they or the children under the care have eaten any food from a predefined list divided by food classes in the last 24 hours. So these modules are very simple. They're easy to enumerate, they're easy to interpret, they're easy to integrate in questionnaires for the household questionnaire, and they also have a low marginal cost. How are we going to be doing the reporting of this new SDG in the practice? The situation is similar. It's not identical, but it is similar to the one that FAO was facing in 2015 regarding the FIES indicator, also known as indicator 212, the prevalence of food, moderate or severe food insecurity among the population. So that is that FAO will be using available data that are coming from the Gallup survey or the DHS survey as a provisional solution, and in parallel, FAO will aim to develop the statistic capacities of countries so they can gather and report their own data. This is a strategy that has given some fruit in the framework of FIS, and this shows with the fact that after 10 years of effort in this sense, the proportion of countries in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean that report their own data for the indicator has been growing constantly. And in the same way, we expect that ever more countries will be reporting the indicator of minimum diet diversity with their own data, so the FAO can slowly move away from the Gallup survey. However, the development of capacity is not a matter that FAO can carry out by itself, and the countries also have their responsibilities regarding this. And in this sense, it is recommendable that the countries will designate a national focal point that can be in the National Institute of Statistics that will be taking on a number of key functions. First, they will study all of the guidelines that are available for the gathering of data. In the case of the minimum food diversity for women, the guidelines are available in Spanish, and you can see here on the slide. And this national focal point would also be receiving technical support from FAO, and they will take on all of the necessary actions to include the corresponding module in a national household survey. They would analyze data and they would convey those data to FAO. And also, in the absence of national data, they will validate the FAO estimations based in other data sources. Lastly, allow me to remind you how this reporting of the new indicator will be done at a world level. Having been approved as an SDG, the data corresponding here, these will be decided through the following databases. The database, the World SDG database, also the SDG domain of FAO Stats, and also the new FAO Data Explorer. So here I'd like to mention that the regional and world level data have already been published, while national level data is foreseen to be published in the second half of this year. Apart from data, we also have the analytic narratives that describe this data and their trends and their differences among the regions. These narratives will be included in different reports, in different world reports, such as the Annual World Report on Progress towards the SDGs, the main publication of FAO, and the state of food security and nutrition in the world, also known as SOFI, and also the regional report of progress towards the SDGs of FAO, the follow-up of the progress relative to the SDG indicators related to food and agriculture. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor back to you. Thank you very much, Dorian, for joining us online. We know that you have a very tight schedule, but we really appreciate this and your intervention. I'd also like to thank Lynette for her presentation, and now I'm going to give the floor to my colleague, Michael Rajilla, Officer of Statistics of FAO for the regional office, who's going to be facilitating the next session of experiences in the Latin American and Caribbean countries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniela, and good morning, everyone. For those who do not know me, I'm Michael Rajilla. I'm the regional statistician, and in few words, it means that I have the privilege of coordinating the team that provides technical assistance to all of the countries in the region in these agricultural statistics. Of course, one of the pillars of our work is SDGs indicators, and for that reason, I'm now following with great interest all of the matters that have been mentioned by your colleagues. And for us, it is a great opportunity to get to know new partners, because these health institutions and ministries of health are not our regional partners, but we do have a lot of eagerness to learn a lot from them and start collaborating with these type of institutions. So, well, let's go now to a very important part in the workshop, where we will be listening regarding the experiences of the countries in the region in the measurement of the diversity of diets. We have the experiences of Mexico, Panama, and Uruguay, who are accompanying us online to share with us their experience with the measurement of the diversity of diet in national surveys. Our main presenter is Dr. Sonia Rodriguez, head of the Department of Food, Culture, and Environment of the Center for Research, Nutrition, and Health in Mexico. Madam Rodriguez, you have 10 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have 2 minutes left. Please, Madam Rodriguez, go ahead.
Muy buenos días. ¿Ya se ve mi pantalla?
Good morning. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Buenos días. Bueno, yo les voy a hablar.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be speaking about the case of Mexico. I would like to begin with this that we saw in the previous presentations. Regarding the minimum diversity of diet is acknowledged as an indicator for healthy diets. and its construction is relatively simple compared to other indicators. However, as we saw, not all countries have the information, or maybe the point has not been validated, something that is suitable for the food that is consumed in that country. So in Mexico, the National Health and Nutrition Service have information regarding diet that is coming from, be that a questionnaire of consumption of food, and in some editions of the service, we also have reminders of 24 hours, but this information is gathered as a subsample of the survey population. Also, the process of cleaning of data, as well as the analysis of the data, requires great supplies, both in time, personal time, and economic time as well. Therefore, having simpler indicators that are coming from instruments that are simple could be an alternative to have timely estimations of the nutritional situation of a country. What have we done in Mexico? I would like to start with this report that was done in coordination with GAIN, that had the objective of assessing the association between the minimum diversity with the adequation of macronutrients. This was done with Mexican and Chinese data. For Mexico, we use the data of the National Survey of Health and Nutrition of 2012, which is a representative survey of the Mexican population. And for China, the Nutrition and Health Survey of 2011. So Health and Nutrition Survey 2011. So they grouped the foods by the manual of FAO, and specifically what was done in this analysis was to replace the fortified foods by the non-fortified food, just to have a scenario where there would not be any other source of micronutrients. So in the case of Mexico, they replace foods such as liconza milk, which is a milk that is provided by the federal program in Mexico. Back then, we also had another program called Prospera that also was giving a nutritional mixed food, and also replacing other known foods that were fortified by the industry, such as pasta, bread, and cereal. All of the analyses that were stratified by age group and sex, and we identified precisely the cutting point that we needed to do to estimate an adequate proportion of macronutrients. Briefly, in this table, I'll show you the results by detail by groups of age and sex. In the case of Mexico, China, at the different levels of compliance of the adequation of micronutrients. So we can see here grossly that in the case of China in general, they needed greater number of groups of foods to achieve these probabilities that we tested. In the case of Mexico, the cutting point, the universal cutting point of 5 groups of food or more, worked well for women in fertile age. So through the different groups of age, we can see different cutting points of this indicator.
Another analysis was conducted using the same database for all the population, children, and senior adults. However, the variation was that instead of replacing fortified foods, what was done was to exclude ultra-processed foods. So we used the NOV8 NOVA classification to identify the foods or products and to exclude them and generate the indicator of diet diversity, and the same estimation was done in terms of the likelihood of adequacy of the micronutrients that I will not list, and also we were able to group the foods based on the FAO's manual, and these are the results. We found the same cut points depending on the age group. We see that in terms of preschoolers, the cut point was of minimum diet diversity was of 4 and more, and it increased as they grew older. And this is very related to this information here, where we see the medium likelihood of adequation of the 11 micronutrients per age group, where we see that it decreases based on the age increase. That is why we need greater food groups to reach the medium probability, the mean probability. Now, within the groups, we see the consumption and also the adequacy of the vitamins and minerals that were assessed. The according to the category with the cut point of the MDD. This is an example for preschool age children where we see that there is greater consumption of vitamins and minerals when they achieve 4 or more food groups. Now, based on this analysis, another analysis was conducted looking at the association between the consumption of ultra-processed diets with the MDD, minimum diet diversity. In this case, we were able to categorize the consumption of ultra-processed foods in 5 levels to look at the behavior of the indicator of the MDD. These were the results, and these are the different food groups and the 5 levels of intake of ultra-processed foods, where the darker blue shade shows the lower consumption or intake of ultra-processed foods or energy coming from that source of foods. In some cases, it is very clear that the more intake of ultra-processed foods, the lower the rate of population that actually consume that group of foods. It is the case of legumes and, of course, the group of eggs. Now, for other food groups, the relationship is not necessarily linear. However, we do see that the ratio of consumers of fruits is lower in the higher level of consumption of ultra-processed foods. If we look at the right-hand side of the picture, we see the percentage of the population that has the minimum diet diversity per level of intake of ultra-processed foods. We do not see a linear relationship either. We know that from the second quintile it decreases, and the highest level is the one that has the lower percentage of population that reached the minimum diet diversity. Now, looking at more recent data from 2016, we were able to analyze similar data to the first report that I presented. Now, alongside with Costa Rica, in Costa Rica, they had information from 3 different food registries in adolescents, and this was exclusively for that age group. And in Mexico, we started from the 24-hour reminder data from ENSANUD. We also looked at other variables in terms of the MDD indicator. We classified the groups once again in 10 groups as per the FAO guidelines, considering the minimum amount, 15 grams of foods or more, and also we established the cut points to have greater sensitivity and specificity to achieve the likelihood of adequation. And these are the results, and we see the differences between Costa Rica and Mexico in terms of food consumption in the population of adolescents. We see that for some foods in Costa Rica, there was a greater percentage of consumers in comparison to the population in Mexico, and also vice versa. In the case of fruits and vegetables that are rich in vitamin A, Costa Rica had a greater proportion of consumers, but in the case of Mexico, there was a larger percentage of consumers of legumes. We also saw the probability of adequacy of different vitamins and minerals in the different countries. We see that in Mexico, there was greater adequacy for calcium and iron. However, in Costa Rica, they had greater adequacy for cobalamin and vitamin A, but altogether they were very similar. I'm so sorry, doctor. We just need to advise you that you only have 1 minute left. Thank you. Finally, we believe that the minimum diet diversity indicator allows us to look at the adequacy of micronutrients in different age groups. It allows us to compare between countries, as we saw in the comparison with China and Costa Rica, and it also allows us to group the foods, or maybe include or exclude foods depending on the objective that we have. For instance, we can exclude fortified foods or ultra-processed foods to look at how the indicator behaves. It is useful when we are not able to obtain detailed data like the food registry or the 24-hour reminder, but also let's remember that we have a challenge, which is to use the universal cut points, because that remains a complexity, and we need to conduct further study to see whether in all the population groups that works correctly. That would be all I had to share with you. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias, doctora Sonia, por darnos esta visión.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sonia, for sharing with us the work that Mexico is conducting in terms of measuring the diet diversity of the Mexican population with health data, and also the research on the threshold in other countries. We now want to give the floor to Mr. Roger Montenegro, researcher in health from the Institute Conmemorativo Gorgas from the south of Panama. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Montenegro, and you have 10 minutes. I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
¿Me indica si se puede ver?
Please let me know when you are able to see my screen. Yes, we see it. There you go.
Perfecto. Adelante, por favor.
Now we are ready. The floor is yours.
En mi participación voy a hablar un poco acerca de lo
I'd
que
like
realizamos.
to share with you the work that has been conducted as part of the National Health Survey in Panama that was conducted in 2019. It was designed by the Ministry of Health and conducted by the Instituto Conmemorativo Gorgas and also the Census Office. To give you context, this survey is a populational survey with the general objective of knowing the health and illness condition and the protective and risk factors of the population that lives in the Republic of Panama.
Y para poder llegar a él, entonces se definieron 14 objetivos
This is a
específicos.
very general study, and within this objective, there are 14 specific objectives. 4 of them were around food and nutrition. And for food, we included the MDD of the household. This is a cross-sectional study stratified per regions, and the study worked on the sample to guarantee that the results were representative at the national level per health region, which in Panama are 16, and also per area of residence, which could be urban, rural, and indigenous. There is a geographic distinction in terms of the urban, rural, and indigenous areas. Therefore, all the national studies have to be sorted in this manner. The random sample was selected, then the primary unit of sampling was a household, and with an electronic device, we were able to randomly choose one person that was 15 or older in the household, and in those households where people were under 15, one of them was selected randomly. Now, what did we do in order to try to assess the diet diversity and other dietary practices? We included the questionnaire on diet diversity at the household level from the FAO. We also used the same indicator for children between 6 and 23 months as part of the indicators to assess the dietary practices of the families and children. We used the guidelines of the WHO. And why did we use food diversity? Because initially we were planning to use other indicators or other tools available, like the 24-hour reminder. However, due to the size of the survey, it was not only addressing foods and nutrition, and in order to achieve that goal, After running different tests and pilot plans, we realized that we needed to change the tool. After that, we started using the household diet diversity because it is a standardized, of lower cost, of easy application, of easy assessment, and we started conducting the surveys based on 12 questions regarding food groups, and for the implementation we used the guidelines to measure diet diversity at the individual and household level from the FAO. Regarding the outcomes, we used the cut point based on what we see on the screen, and we defined 3 groups: lower diet diversity with 3 or less food groups, the mid diversity between 4 and 5 food groups, and high dietary diversity if they had consumed 6 or more different food groups in the last 24 hours. We were able to see that 8 of the 10 households had a high diet diversity. However, there is a difference because in the indigenous area, only 50% of people would achieve that high diet diversity, and 1 in 4 was rated as mid or low diet diversity. Now, if we look at the results per group, per food groups, over 80% of the household indicated that they had consumed sugars, cereals, and other. Usually, the food group that is consumed the most is of sugars, and in rural areas, the situation is fairly similar. However, in the indigenous areas, the diversity is lower. Looking at the individual indicator of MDD that was used with the document of FAO and the WHO, we saw that in this age group of 6 to 23 months, the minimum diversity was of 64.7%, following the cut point of 4 of 7 food groups that were assessed. Once again, in this age group, we see how the diversity is lower in the group of indigenous areas, or regions rather. Regarding certain difficulties, success points, and following steps, due to the size of the study, we were unable to use a more specific tool, and we had to resort to using the tool at the household and individual level. By using this at the household and individual level, we were able to have a view of the household specifically for that vulnerable group, which are minors of 6 to 23 months. However, we have to know that when we go to the field to ask questions, some people felt it was annoying to respond to their consumption of foods in the prior 24 hours, and that was difficult for the people that had been selected. As following steps, looking at the results, we highlight the fact that the indigenous areas have a lower dietary diversity. However, here in Panama, there are 3 indigenous regions, and they are very different from one another. We have 3 different regions, and when looking at the dietary diversity, looking at the 3 specific regions, we were able to see that there is a certain level of difference within the indigenous regions too. So the next step would be, and we already have a study protocol drafted, to conduct a specific survey on those regions, taking into account a higher specificity to explore the differences between different indigenous areas. Also, including the category of ultra-processed foods as per the NOVA. This is a project that has been drafted already. However, we are waiting for funding for that. Those were the results in the National Survey of Health from 2019, and this is the QR code that would take you to the website of the survey where all the results are, the databases, and also the analysis that were conducted.
Muchísimas gracias, Roger, por contarnos sobre esa experiencia.
Thank you so much, Roger, for sharing that experience with us.
Quiero destacar que podrían también generar resultados desagregados por
I'd
hogares
like to
indígenas.
highlight that you could also explore the data per indigenous household. Unfortunately, there are many results that in the region generated specific data for those groups. Finally, we will listen to the representative from the Social Ministry of Uruguay, Natalia de Souza. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes, and I will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to share with you regarding the work regarding the indicator of the minimum diet diversity in minors 6 to 23 months that we collected with the Survey of Health in Uruguay. I'd like to share with you that this is a pioneer in our country because this was the first time that we had access to systematic representative data regarding the early childhood, their families, and their evolution along their lives. The objective was to generate knowledge, to serve as input for the generation of public policies based on the health of the childhood population and how they are evolving as they grow. This is a survey that has been taking place from 2013, always with financing from the state. The latest agreement was signed in 2022 between different state parties to guarantee the continuity of the survey. The survey combines a longitudinal socio-demographic study and, on the other hand, a cross-sectional study, and both of them together give us information on the trajectory of children and their families. The longitudinal study allows us to see the evolution of children, and the cross-sectional studies are conducted every 5 years, and they give us a snapshot of the situation of the early childhood, which allows us to update the different public policies that are meant to serve the early childhood. Another important aspect of the NDIS is that it always tries to innovate, and in this sense, we added to the cross-sectional studies the rural NDIS. And what it does is to highlight the situation of the early childhood in their families in smaller rural areas of under 5,000 inhabitants, which is also quite a milestone for our country because up until this moment, we never had information regarding the growth and development of children in smaller villages, and it allows us to have better information regarding the childhood in all the country. The work lines of NDIS are producing data and information in relation to early childhood. Secondly, another important part of the work is to make sure that the information is utilized by the decision makers and to draft public policies, and also that it is known by the society overall. Another important point is that it aims at promoting research on early childhood, and the purpose is that all the databases that are collected are of free access to be used, and also there are callings for researchers to exploit the data available. Up to date, we have over 20 pieces of research that have been funded for national and regional pieces of research. I'd like to share with you what the organization of the NDIS looked like with the longitudinal panel that started in 2013, the cross-sectional studies, and also different actions to maintain the longitudinal study. Now, very briefly, I'd like to summarize the different modules that are included as part of the NDIS. The modules are meant to strengthen knowledge regarding child nutrition, right to health, access to education, among others. And regarding the module on food and nutrition, which is the point of our meeting, in NDs, they collect information differently depending on the age of children. For those minors from 6 to 23 months, we're using the indicators recommended by the WHO and UNICEF in 2021 for the food of younger children. And in this case, we find out the indicator of the MDD for children 24 to 59 months. We do not have specific indicators, and for that, we use the food guidelines for the Uruguayan population of the public health minister.
Regarding the minimum diversity of diet, is about boys and girls from 6 to 23 months of age that took groups from five of the groups that we defined in the day. So these are the groups of food that we defined in the WHO, as we saw before. And also let you know how we do the Andes. We ask for a reference of the boy and girl. If yesterday the child took any food from each one of these groups that I'm going to be naming you. So as you see, 16 groups. So they have 8 groups included in minimum diversity of diet. But also we asked about other groups that allow us having other results, such as, for instance, the intake of sugary drinks, ultra-processed foods that are also being seen. We thought it was also important to have these indicators as well. Regarding the results of this indicator, as we can see, based on level of income and age, how he evolved, we see that almost 80%, that is 79.7% of boys and girls in Uruguay reach a minimum diversity of diets. And this percentage increases as children grow older, go from 66.3% in the younger children from 6 to 11 months to 86.4% in the older kids. So we see that this percentage is also greater in the households that have greater income, from 74.9% in the poorest households to 83.3% in the highest income third. Another important point to highlight here is that close to 20% of children present an inadequate diversity of diet. That is, they take 4 or fewer groups of the recommendation, and this problem is more frequent in younger children and also in households with lower incomes. And this can be showing some form of access gaps to foods that are adequate and suitable in the socioeconomic level and also the age of the children. What we can see now is a comparison of this indicator analyzed in year 2018 and in 2023. In both cases, the indicator is calculated with a cutting point that is up to date, that considers at least 5 of the 8 groups of foods. And as we can see in the country, the evolution of this indicator has been quite positive, because the minimum diversity of diet increased 8.6 percentage points in 5 years. So it goes from 71.1% in 2018 to 79.6% in year 2023. What persists here is an important gap by socioeconomic level, because it's the households with the lowest income that continue presenting the lowest percentage of compliance with this indicator, which again can tell us about structural inequality in access to varied suitable foods and diets. Finally, I wanted to let you know regarding the barriers and challenges that we've had in this year for this indicator. As I was saying, this indicator is being highlighted in the ND since 2018. To date, we have 3 highlights, 2018 and 2023 in the urban areas. And the challenge we have is to continue measuring this indicator in the later NDs round. So one of the main difficulties presented here in 2021, when this indicator was updated, we moved the cutting points in the questionnaire of NDs. We already had it designed to go to the field. Luckily, we had a question regarding the consumption of mother's milk. That was the group of foods that we incorporated to the indicator, and this allowed to adapt ourselves and calculate the updated indicator with this new code point. Another challenge we have is how extensive the questionnaire is in NDIS. Nowadays, the interview lasts 90 minutes, and it is 17 indicators related to food and diet of children that we recommend to highlight by the WHO and UNICEF. And to date, we see ourselves forced to select and prioritize certain indicators because of the extension of this whole survey. We can't highlight all of them. And another limitation we have is that we do not have indicators for taking the practice of diet in children of 2 years and older. We have indicators that are international. So this makes it difficult because this generates gaps at a level of the at a level of information at a national level, and also the capacity of comparing ourselves to other countries in the regional level. And also to end here, we have a link of the Social Development Ministry where we have available all of the data, metadata, and report of this report so they can be used. And the data on the last two cohorts of 2023 are still unpublished because they are in the process of harmonization, but soon they will be available in this link. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Natalia.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for sharing your experience. It is very interesting from Uruguay, and especially I wanted to highlight again the disaggregation presented by income level and age, and I find that very interesting to see those indicators disaggregated by these subgroups. Sadly, because of time, and the organizers told me we have time for just 2 questions. So I have one question for Lynette, and then I have another one for Valeska. So please, let's begin with Lynette. Considering the growing interest in this indicator, how can countries prepare to implement the indicators for the diversity of diets in their national measurements?
Gracias por la pregunta. Hay varias cosas que se puede hacer.
There are several things that can be done.
Están los manuales.
We have the manuals, and if I remember correctly, at least for women, the one for women is in Spanish as well, and in English, and you can check it. This is a good starting point. But very soon, we're going to be distributing first and discussing this with the counterparts in the regions. We're going to be doing some training workshops. I can't promise any dates yet, because it is always a process of getting all of the activities together, but the idea is to do these workshops both for people in the area of statistics as well as the users of data, and that will be the Ministry of Health or other users. So what I can recommend is that you should start checking the guidelines, and soon we will distribute more resources so they can be, so you can see, looking at the different experiences. We saw 3 examples here, but we have a lot of countries with good examples. We have a lot of different ways of generating this data, and the example of Mexico, where they have, as I mentioned already, the reminder of 24 hours, which is quantitative, but they can distill this in the diversity from there. So I also recommend that you should look at the studies and the surveys, that they should be national or smaller for your countries, so you can see how this has been used. It's not necessarily that this has been officially cited in the surveys, but in many countries in that region in particular, we have studies that have been using the indicator for an objective. So get familiarized with that experience and the data you got from there. Maybe that's a great opportunity to approach the academic organizations. Here we had 3 examples, and we wanted to look for in Chile, in all of the countries, to try to approach the academic institution to see whether or not they have experience with that indicator. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Y la segunda
Thank you
pregunta es
very
para
much. And the
Valeska.
second question is for
¿Qué
Valeska.
políticas o programas
What policies
se
or
benefician
programs
de esta
benefit
información y de qué
from
manera su
this
implementación
information?
mejoró
How can the
gracias a la
implementation
disponibilidad de esos
improve
datos?
thanks to the availability of data?
Bueno, nosotros
Well,
como sistema Elige Vivir Sano
we,
tenemos
as
la
Elige Vivir
posibilidad de
Sano
hacer la
system,
coordinación
have the possibility of making a coordination with the different partners of the system, where the Ministry of Health is an important one, the Ministry of Education also very important, the Ministry of Sports, and I didn't point it out and it's not included here, but as the index for physical activity, speaking of the caloric output that is not in the measurement, effectively we do have some things that are related here. Our system is a system that effectively is consolidating the public policy regarding healthy habits and is being updated year after year. That is why the beneficiaries, speaking of the fact that the system will consolidate more reporting and more public institutionalities that it would concur, and so we can put in a dialogue from here these benefits, I hope. Ever more institutions speaking of the fact that we work in a multi-sector way in the system. And as you well know, and we spoke as well in the forum of the previous days, the multi-sector aspect of it has a number of challenges which are going beyond the common role measurements and that they should be dialoguing with, but if they don't have adequate governance that allows us to interact and not double information or standardize it or have indicators that are interoperable between the institutions to take measurements that will allow us to focus and move the needle, as we say. This indicator is very important. And we need to make some efforts. I was listening here in our National Health Survey. It's a survey that has not been done since 2017, so therefore we do need to update it. We have the nutritional map from PUNAEP, where we effectively have the information of the students, but it's done year by year, but not necessarily has a dialogue with the survey that allows us to look at the life cycle. And in terms of women, here we have a very important challenge where we, at the very least, as a system, we want to take ownership and strongly push this and go to our other partners, such as the Ministry of Women, DINET, Concord as a main player here. And we believe they should do so, and so we take on the challenge. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you to the presenters and also to the panel members for your answers and the presentations that are so interesting and so important as we're going to be progressing with these important indicators. So now we come to the time of the closing. And I have the pleasure of giving the floor to Maya Takaji, the leader of the regular program of FAO here in the regional office of Santiago. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Michael.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. Everyone who's present here today in person and who's online. I'd like to greet Valeska. Thank you so much for being here with us. And Lynette, our nutrition director, who came from Rome for the effect of last year's food system. And she stays here with us. And also the team who organized this event.
I
would like to say that, of course, we come to the end of this regional dialogue on the new indicator of the minimum diversity of diet, that for us is one more step. We continue progressing in the important task of us as the UN of supporting countries in the measurements of progress towards SDG 2, not only SDG 2, but also to all of the SDGs that we defend as an agency of all countries. So I would like to thank you for the very complete presentation, not only for the content and the methodology. So what's important here is that we presented all three countries, Mexico, Panama, Uruguay, showing that we do have very good examples for implementation, showing that it is feasible. Apart from being feasible, we have a chance of have some disaggregation that we can consider and even making temporary comparisons. So what do we want here? Is that with this indicator plus in some years, so we can see how this progresses and also how this is seen in technical groups and age groups. We can maybe see later and use this for other age groups. I was thinking, for instance, in the people that are older in terms of, which is also a vulnerable group in terms of food diversity. So just to confirm this, our commitment with the FAO to continue supporting this, supporting the measurement, but mainly we want to see that these methodologies should improve the implementation of public policies that are more suitable towards food and nutritional safety and security, and also not only for children and women, but also for the whole population. Also, we like to highlight the role of women in pregnancy, but also in guaranteeing the quality of diet for boys and girls, but also reinforce for men the fact that it's just women who are just in the indicators. This does not mean, of course, that men don't have a role in guaranteeing this diversity for diets in the household. What's important here, of course, the involvement of the national institutions for public health and also for statistics in this effort. And this event also showed the important contribution between the statistics and public health and or nutrition and or social development. And these are the main, I think, beneficiaries for this new methodology. I would like to also thank everyone who was here with us today. And also we continue promoting this type of debate. I also wanted to thank Lynette for announcing the upcoming steps. Today was just a dialogue that was very initial, and now we wanted to continue progressing with this implementation at a country level. So our decision-making processes improve and also accountability processes also improve. So thank you very much.